In this video, I want to talk about what effect HR 127 would have on California cases like the Miller v. Becerra case, as well as the Duncan v. Becerra case. A lot of you guys were asking about this, so let's talk about it. But real quick, before we jump into the video, I want to thank a couple of the main sponsors of the channel. The first being USCCA. USCCA has training through their membership, as well as you get a lot of education through your membership, and you get as well liability protection for concealed carry. So if you're interested in taking a look at that, you can click the link down in the details section. And I also want to thank TacPack. TacPack has a subscription-based box for gearheads like me and you. You can get a lot of good things in it, like knives, apparel, things for rifle and pistol builds, things like that. It's just really neat. And if you use the code ARMSCHOLAR, you'll get a free $40 grab bag. So you can find a link to TacPack down in the details section as well. So HR 127, this is a bill we've talked about quite a bit on this channel. I've had multiple discussions with you guys about whether or not we should be concerned about it or should not, and some rational discussion we should be having about this bill. An interesting thing that has popped up in relation to HR 127 and a lot of the other California cases that we cover on this channel is a lot of people were asking what effect would HR 127 have on cases like Miller v. Becerra, which is a challenge to California's assault weapons language here in the state through Penal Code 30515, as well as other cases like Duncan v. Becerra, which challenged California Penal Code 32310 and California's magazine capacity limitations. So one of the first things that I want to cover with you guys when answering this question about what effect HR 127 would have on these California cases that we're really anticipating, we've been waiting for a long time, is the concept of federal preemption. A real simple summary of federal preemption is that any U.S. state law that contradicts federal law is preempted by the federal law. So just think of it as supremacy. Essentially, the federal law takes supremacy or is more powerful than the state law. So let's take a look at Miller v. Becerra. Miller v. Becerra is a challenge to California's assault weapons language, and it's a challenge specifically to California Penal Code 30515 and the various categories of firearms that the state classifies as assault weapons or so-called assault weapons. So let's say Judge Benitez rules on the side of the Second Amendment and finds that California's law does indeed violate the Second Amendment. But then something like HR 127 or a similar bill were to pass, what then would happen? Well, specifically, one of the things I want to draw a distinction between is what HR 127 is doing specifically to so-called assault weapons and what Miller v. Becerra is dealing with directly. Because a lot of you were writing in comments that it doesn't matter, HR 127 is going to get passed, and then Miller v. Becerra is moot. The issue with that is what is addressed in Miller v. Becerra specifically has to do with possession of so-called assault weapons. What HR 127 does to so-called military-style weapons and to other firearms as well is it requires licensing for so-called military-style weapons and then also registration of all firearms. So that's really what 127 would do to things like assault weapons in the state of California. HR 127 wouldn't ban the possession of these types of rifles across the US. What it does is it requires a licensing and registration of those firearms, whereas Miller v. Becerra deals directly with a ban on possession of these types of firearms. So if HR 127 were to pass, it wouldn't directly affect the case Miller v. Becerra. What it would do is add on an additional layer. Let's say that we win Miller v. Becerra all the way. We find that an outright ban on the possession of types of firearms like this is unconstitutional. Well, that doesn't address the licensing requirements stated in 127, and it doesn't even address the registration aspect of 127. Now, there could be a little bit interplay on the registration, but mainly what 127 does specifically to military-style weapons is the licensing. So Miller wouldn't address the licensing. So you would have to probably still do all the licensing requirements under federal law because, like we talked about, federal preemption, but you would still be able to possess them if that California language was found unconstitutional. Where this really gets interesting is the case Duncan v. Becerra, because the language you see challenged in Duncan through California Penal Code 32310 and the language that you see in HR 127, they are almost identical. California Penal Code 32310 bans the possession, importation, buying, selling, manufacturing of any magazine that holds more than 10 rounds or so-called large capacity magazines. What HR 127 does is it seeks to have an outright federal ban on all magazines that have a capacity of more than 10 rounds. Pretty similar, right? So what could potentially happen is if in Duncan v. Becerra, the Ninth Circuit or the en banc rules in our favor, finds that this language is unconstitutional, But then something like HR 127 or a very narrow aspect of 127 were to get pushed through a different bill, then it becomes a question of now you have a federal law on the book that says that individuals cannot possess magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. Then you have a California law in 32310, which was found unconstitutional by the Ninth Circuit, and that a ban on magazines more than 10 rounds is unconstitutional. What happens then? What then happens is you really have this interesting contradiction between what the Ninth Circuit would say and then potentially what this bill, HR 127, would say, and that makes it really ripe for a case in the Supreme Court. And the whole question would be whether magazines that hold more than 10 rounds are protected under the Second Amendment. This would be a really interesting case to see go up to the Supreme Court, and we are already anticipating maybe something like Miller or Duncan or Rupp or Rhodey, all these California cases, we're anticipating maybe they would make their way up to the Supreme Court because they are very interesting issues. What would make this even more likely to have to be addressed by the Supreme Court is because you would have a federal law, 127, saying, hey, you can ban magazines, and then you would have the Ninth Circuit that would rule potentially saying, no, you can't ban magazines more than 10 rounds because it's unconstitutional. You would see the dichotomy there where you have a lot of contradiction, and the Supreme Court would have to address that. And this would unfortunately leave a lot of Californians in a really weird limbo area where if something like 127's ban on magazines that hold more than 10 rounds were to pass, and then we would get a favorable ruling in Duncan that says, hey, you can't apply California's Penal Code 32310. Well, that deals specifically with Penal Code 32310, a state law, but not the federal law that just passed. And so potentially the federal law would still be applied, and that would really suck for a lot of us in California if we just got rid of 32310, anticipating, hey, we get to possess magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, and then a federal law just automatically hits the book and saying, well, sorry, now at a federal level, everybody's barred, including you, California, who just got rid of this law. But again, it would be something that would have to get addressed by the Supreme Court because of the contradiction potentially. So it's a really interesting question, and it's a really interesting thought experiment to see how all of these things would interplay if something like this were to happen. Do I think that something like this will happen? No, I don't. I don't think 127 will actually get passed all the way through, and we would have to face a situation like this. I think it's much more likely that it's going to be par for the course. We're going to still see the effect of Duncan and Miller outright play at the state level, federal level, all that stuff. I don't think we'll see a federal overarching bill come into the mix. But it's an interesting thought experiment. I know a lot of you guys had questions and were making statements that a lot of the stuff that's going on, a lot of these California cases won't matter because of 127. I very much think that they do still matter. I think really these are the cases that we need to be keeping our eye on, especially here in the state of California, because they will directly affect us here in the state. And if you'd be interested in learning more about HR 127, you can click this video right there, and I walk through that bill comprehensively and all the things that it is attempting to do. And if you want to learn more about Miller v. Becerra and where we're currently at in that case, you can click this video right there, and it's my most recent video where I walk through where we're currently at in Miller. So thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.